Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I've done it again. Due to circumstances, I'm 2 days late with my watering. I sort of circumvented it by, sort of whizzing round with the sprayer and at least doing surface root areas of the pots and things. And I mean, the Mount's got a good spray, they're okay. But today I've really got to tuck in and get this back on track. 2 days late at this time of year is not good. I've got away with it pure and simply because we've had dull weather over most of those days. But yesterday the sun came out in the afternoon. For the first time in quite a while, the fog has kicked in, which always tells me, the temperature's up. And temperature up and lack of water, it's not the best combination. It's not good. And in the growing season, you're losing a bit. And I mean, this is the second time in a row it's happened to me, so I need to get back on top of this. So today is going to be a busy day. I'm going to try and water everything. I mean, I've done it before, it's okay, but how do you turn a busy day into a relaxing day? Well, get up in the morning and start earlier, which I'm up anyway, so I've got no excuse. So I have noticed a few little marvels as I was whizzing round with the sprayer, and I'll pick up on those as I go round. They're not like brand new blooms or everything, but they will be soon, and there's some first bloomers coming up, one of which is pretty damn special. So as I say, I've got to do everything. I'm not going to film everything. Like I usually do on watering day, I'll pick out on the bits and bobs that, major changes and all things like that. Filming slows me down when I'm watering, but by starting a couple of hours early, I take the pressure off. It's a very simple procedure. If you're in a rush, things happen. Go and have a look at Danny's video. Now, that's nothing to do with her being in a rush, but it may have been earlier. I mean, I know I've got plants that are very top heavy. And when a pot's wet, it counterbalances a plant and stops it tipping over. But you turn your back and the pot dries out, and suddenly the top of the plant, which is on a slight incline perhaps, becomes so top heavy it overrides the weight of the pot and it just tips in the middle of the night. And then you come down and you think, who's been in the grow room knocking all my plants over? But it isn't. The accidents happen. And if you're in a rush, you're inclined to drop things or knock things over. So, to the best of your ability, take away the rush. I mean, this is a hell of a day. There's nearly 200 plants in here, and I've got to water them all by hand, picking up each individual pot, watering it, allowing it to drain, clearing a shelf at a time, and then putting the plants back, often with a bit of rearranging, a few tweaks on positions and things like that. Checking them over, make sure no bugs have got in there. And, it's a busy day, but spread out over a long period. I've got nothing else to do today. If it takes all day, so be it. I can have breaks, relax a bit, and enjoy the plants as I water them. Now, obviously I used to work. I don't anymore. And times like this when I used to work, I'd be watering at 4:30 in the morning, trying to cram in as much as possible before having to go to work. That's when the accidents happen. I've got a long memory. I remember things. My worst accident recently was dropping my brassivola flat on its face and broke off the 2 new growths. Yes, it's growing 2 more, but there's probably a year's worth of setback there as far as blooms are concerned. Those new growths would be maturing now if I hadn't broke them off, whereas now I've got 2 little buds coming out from the rhizomes. So, accidents happen. But, you can de-risk it. And de-risking it to me is just take your time. When you put a pot back on a shelf, especially if it's a high shelf, make sure it's sat square. And if it's what I call a lollopy plant, one that's hanging over the one side of the pot and not the other side, obviously as the pot dries out, that pot's going to lean. Well, put the pot up against another pot so that the plant can't take the pot over. do what you can to de-risk it. You know, I mean, we all love our orchids, and you know, we don't really want to wake up. Well, I don't think Danny was asleep, but you don't really want to walk into where your orchids are and find 5 or 6 on the flipping floor, do you? So, you know, take care, take your time, enjoy your plants. And on that subject, I need to get on with it, don't I? Now, this is one of these at flipping last moments, if I can get the thing out of the pot. I've just watered it. This plant has struggled for a long time. Now we've got some root growth, active root growth. Now that's more like it. You're not going to live without roots, stupid plant. But it combines that root growth, which is relatively new, with the new leaf. So I mean, that plant is now fine, that's okay. It's not a good Paphiopedilum, it's still only got one flipping fan on it, and there's no sign of any more coming. Nonetheless, that fan will bloom, eventually. Slow coaches. Yeah, just going over the Paphiopedilums, there are still a couple really struggling to get new roots out, but some are pulling on now. A lot of that was basically just due to repotting them. With Paphiopedilums, they seem to love it. It seems to trigger new root growth, and they really do not like stale media. As soon as the media starts to go, chances are your roots are going to stop growing. Even if they were before, they then stop. And then, on top of that, their love for staying moist starts breaking the media down even faster, and your roots start to rot. So you really have got to keep on top of these if you want to grow them well, which I don't. I don't mean I don't keep on top of them, I mean I don't grow them very well. I haven't got any what I would call really good Paphiopedilums, and some of them I've had 4 or 5 years. I just keep losing the old fans. So, you know, I am going to try and keep on top of them now and try and progress them into much larger, stronger plants. A single fan Paphiopedilum is not a strong plant. It needs the support. It's one of those plants that if you can get 5 or 6 fans all alive with a root system, then the chances are you get multiple new growths, which leads to blooming and multiple blooms, because a lot of them only have a single bloom. You know, there are multi-bloom Paphiopedilums, but I haven't got any. All of mine have bloomed, bar one, don't get me wrong, but the word eventually just has to go in there. There's often one of these, at least one of them, in bloom in midwinter, you know, sort of end of year, beginning of the next year. You know, at which point I can bring it in the house and enjoy the blooms, because it quite appreciates the warmer temperatures. But anyway, I mean, that one's kicking off at long last. And this is what I mean. This is my most rubbish Paphiopedilum. And quite honestly, again, single fan. It lost its support fan. It just died. And as you can see by those lower 2 leaves, I nearly lost the new growth as well. So I'm lucky to still have this one. I'm not very tolerant with Paphiopedilums, but again, what we've got in the pot is nice active growth. So this fan will be fine and probably will progress and bloom. But it's the subsequent fans, the ones that follow on. I've got to try and work out why I lose my old fans and stop it happening. There's probably no one reason. I mean, it might be they get too cold in the winter, but it's probably more like multiple reasons and a bit of each. But whatever it is, I'm going to try and stop it and try and get some larger plants. I'm not buying any new ones. That's not going to happen. I can't even be attracted by the most marvellous bloom on these. I've got what I want. I don't want any more. But I'd like to look after the ones I've got better. And this regular repotting seems to be part of the key. So it's going to happen, you know. I mean, I'm not going to get sloppy and allow plants to just stay in their pot too long. Keep these roots growing, keep them active, and don't lose any. And that's got to be part of the secret. Well, it's not secret, it's laziness on my part, you know, but I mean, that is a lovely bloom, Paphiopedilum Evelyn Rourke. You know, so let's start looking after them a bit better. At the moment, most of them seem to be doing better, you know, so let's try and keep them going this time. It's a little trick I just thought of. Paphiopedilums are effectively terrestrials, but because I like to see the roots, I still plant them in clear pots. But that's not good for them. Their roots ought to be in the dark. So I put the clear pots inside a non-clear pot. That sort of solves the problem. But these little pots, I didn't have a non-clear pot small enough that this one would tuck into. So I've just put a bit of duct tape round there to shut the light out. And that, turns a clear pot into a terrestrial. The downside is I can't see the flipping roots now. But, you've got to look after the plant, and this one's really not growing very well, but it is producing a new leaf. I mean, this is a miniature. It doesn't grow much bigger than this. But at least it's doing some growing, which it hasn't done for a long time. This was rootless when I potted it. It had nothing. I still don't know whether it's got roots or not. If there are any in there, they're in the centre of the pot and they haven't made the edge yet. But it's growing a new leaf, and it seems to me a pattern that with a new leaf will come new root growth. It's often the case, isn't it? But, even with a terrestrial type, it's still probably the case. Anyway, at least it's growing. Well, my large Masdevallia is pushing out new growths all over the place, but it still hasn't bloomed this year. I'll have to see how that goes. There may be some sort of inbuilt thing that, because obviously I'm in my summer period, so it's probably just too warm for this plant. And it may be that as we get into autumn, it might trigger the bloom spikes. Often bloom spikes are triggered by some form of change, either getting warmer, getting cooler, getting brighter, those sorts of things. But there are so many Masdevallia hybrids, it's difficult to find out what went into making this one, apart from the fact it's pure white, and when it blooms, it's quite nice. But it hasn't done it for a while now. But it's chucking out new growths, and they're nice healthy new growths, and there's plenty more to come. But, that's a bit of good news. I've actually got a Masdevallia with root growth, because the others haven't. But this one is now growing. It's now pushing new growths, and it has a root system. So, this one at least is surviving and has the capability of surviving okay because it's got a root system. Masdevallias without root system in heat are probably just not going to make it. If you can keep them nice and cool and keep the humidity up, they'll survive long enough to produce a root system. But, summertime and Masdevallias in here, I think it's only the high humidity that allows these to continue growing. Otherwise they'd just keel over, and then they'd look like that. That's one that's struggling like hell, and that's a cold grower, not a cool grower. Cool is one thing, cold is another. That comes from very high up, and it's struggling. But let's put a new growth up here. It's got another one here, another one here, and another one here. And if combined with those new growths, new roots are also growing. I can't see any because the plant is central in the moss and it hasn't long been done. So new root growth is in the centre of the pot, and until it reaches the edge of the pot I can't see it. So I don't know whether it exists or not. And I'm certainly not hoiking the plant out of the pot to see if it's got any roots. But if it continues in this heat with no roots, it's just going to look like that. And its only chance of pulling up and looking like a reasonable plant is that new growths are still growing when the heat dies down. That'll give it a chance, but it wasn't strong enough to go into my summer, really. This one's okay. It's not brilliant, but it's okay. It has got a few roots, not many, but new growths. This one's got new growths and new roots. You're okay, mate. And this one didn't have a brilliant root system, but it had some when I repotted it, and it's now in pure moss and large perlite, giant perlite. So that's what it's in, and it's staying in there for some time until that moss starts to go. And maybe we'll get some blooms. Well, this plant doesn't get on film much. This is one of the larger plant-wise cotyledons. It's Moriana. And it's the variety Magnifica, and it's got the Brockhurst name against it, which was once an awarded plant by the RHS. It's one of the large white cotyledons, and well, somebody bought one of these in to the New Forest show when we were setting up in Bloom, and I had a look at their plant, and their plant had this trouble on the leaves too. And I said, have you ever worked out what that is? They said it's lack of hydration, pure and simple. And it's often the way with this particular type of coelogeny that when you repot it, it dumps its roots. It's, you know, it's one of those that's not happy about being repotted. And I said, well, what can you do about that? And he said, well, you can either put it in a non-organic media so that you never need to repot it, but most of those are not suitable for coelogenies, but some people grow them well like that. But he said, you know, all I do is, you know, I wait, because it was quite a large plant, is I wait for a good number of new growths to come and push out their new roots and repot it then, so that any of the old roots that die off don't matter so much, because the new roots will replace them, and you've just got to get the timing right. Well, I've got 3 new growths here. One's got the distorted leaves and is now, that's its 2 leaves. So the bulb will swell up, obviously. Got another one here that's growing on, and it's got signs of the distortion, and these new growths are not pushing out new roots yet, so I don't know at what point they will, but it might be when the bulbs are nearly mature. But that's a bud, that's a flower spike. That is nothing to do with leaves. And in my mind's eye, I'd forgotten a lot of coelogenies produce their flower spikes down here, somewhere down near the base of the bulb, part way up, or even at the base. But this one pushes its flower spike straight out the top, and that's a flower spike, and that will be a first time bloom. Most of my coelogenies are in that category. They either haven't bloomed or in some cases have bloomed once poorly. But basically it's with coelogenies, it seems to be getting it right in the growing season. And there's a lovely Australian site guy who's got it's dedicated to coelogenies. All the species are on there with guidelines for each one. It's a good site. I think it's just called coelogenies.com. But whatever, the advice for an awful lot of the coelogenies is do not feed in the summer. Put your feed in the spring, promote the new growths, and then again in the autumn. There's no real explanation why. But as a consequence, I'm in the middle of the growing season at the moment, and I know there's a flower spike coming on that. But, you know, this gets 2 flushes and then a week feed. And then I'll up the feed a bit as we come out the end of the summer. I'll always try something if things aren't working. I've got cristatas, coelogeny cristatas, never bloomed. They're healthy plants, loads of new growths, root systems, they're okay. They won't bloom. So, you know, I'm trying something different. So I'm knocking the feed out virtually across the board on the coelogenies, except for Fimbriata, which blooms in the autumn, and mine have bloomed. So, you know, they're okay the way I treat them. But no coelogenies get high level feeds, you know, they get medium or low. But 3 good new growths, one of which is going to bloom. And I expect that if I get the good root system I'm after with those 3 new growths, plus the bulbs will push out this way, the next new growths will be here and start to fill this pot up because it is over potted, but that is in expectation of what's going to happen next. Shouldn't be in a pot that big really, but the next one down would have been far too small and these new growths would have already been up against the edge of the pot. So that's the plan for that we do have a flower spike coming. I don't know how long that takes to develop. I haven't had one before. But coming soon, large white coelogeny. Yay. And it's just dawned on me picking this up with the spike on that I've managed to get all my twinkles in a muddle. None of them have got tags on. Now I know they're twinkles, but I don't know which colour is which until they bloom next time. This one looks remarkably like a twinkle, but it's not. So I know what this one is purely by the look of it. And the fact that it's got a red tag in it, it was my daughter's, but she's only got her Phalaenopsis now. And I know this isn't a twinkle, firstly by looking at the spike, and secondly by looking at the plant. It's got rhizomes climbing and various things that say it's not a twinkle to me. What it is a miniature Oncidium type with no ID. Now I've got a feeling when this opens, I think it's a Howiara, But we'll wait and see. But the spike's developing quite nicely. It's got some branches. We've got a branch, possibly a second one, and maybe one lower down. It's a fair way from flowering, but it is a miniature. And if I remember rightly, the blooms that go with this one are small but perfectly formed. But it's on its way. I mean, it's growing. It's pushed that spike out of the latest new growth, as one would expect. It has another 2 new growths, maybe 3, following on behind, so there may be a succession of blooms. But this was in bloom when we got it last summer sometime. It hasn't bloomed since, so it's going to be like a bit of a surprise, because I can't really remember what it looks like. Probably yellow and red, but we'll wait and see. Well, that was convenient. The next plant I picked up was a twinkle. Now, I don't know which one this is, which colour it is, but I don't know whether you can see it by putting the plants together, but I can see these are different plants. These have darker leaves, they have more of a sheen to them than this plant. The pseudobulbs tend to be nice and down, you know, near the media. They don't make any attempt to climb. They do grow on top of each other, but that's not the same thing. That just makes for a bushy plant, basically, as opposed to a climbing rhizome, you know, where the base of the new growth is well away from the media, and the roots have got some work to do to get down in it, which they're currently doing. Let's give them a bit of encouragement and tuck them in. So that is a twinkle, and this is the beauty of not touching your plants for a little while but not leaving them too long. I was just going to say I haven't got any spikes on my twinkles yet. Well, what's that then? Come on, open your eyes, boy. So this one is starting to spike. It has many new growths. You can see this is a new growth with no pseudobulb yet, whereas this is a new growth that has got a mature pseudobulb and is now spiking. So I now know roughly when to look for spikes on this particular twinkle. It might produce 2, might produce one out from the other side as well, but we'll wait and see. But in theory I should have a succession of blooms on this plant, because I've got a lot of new growths and they're at various stages. Some have not long started, some are nice and big, and some are mature. So we should have a succession on that one. It's going to be a long time before we see blooms on that. Boy, are these things slow. I wonder if they've got any Paphiopedilum in them. Anyway, that's just to put the two together, because it might have sounded odd that I know the difference, but, well, now you can see the difference. They're not the same plant. This is a miniature Oncidium type of some sort. That is the genuine article. That is a twinkle. This will be the last chance to see these blooms this year. This is a late spike Dendrobium hercoglossum. It's just a little spike with 4 or 5 buds on that's out of season effectively. But yeah, we'll have those while they're going. Anytime. I mean, not a patch on the good flush it had earlier in the year, but yeah, it's just a late spike. Some dendrobiums just do that. Even though they might be classed as a spring bloomer, they'll have another little go. And yeah, I'll have to try and hang that back up so that I can see these. They last a couple of weeks, you know, so it's worth getting it in a position where I can see it up high so that I can look up at them, because they always point downwards. This dendrobium, the blooms point downwards. The best view is from underneath, looking up against the light. But yeah, they've just opened basically. They weren't open last time I watered it. And last time I filmed this, is one of my wildcats bobcat. It's got 2 new leads going in opposite directions because it's 2 separate plants. And I actually said at the time, if that bulb is big enough to bloom, then probably so is this one. Well, don't you love it when a plan comes together? So we've got a bloom at each end of this plant, sorry, a spike at each end of this plant now. This spike's probably not going to be as good as the other one because the bulb's not as big. But we'll see, you know, even if it only has 1 bloom on it, you know, it's progress. So I don't know how long they're going to be, but coming soon. Well, that's a bit of good news. This is the really big Cattleya I got at the auction, and I got it cheaper than I should have done really, because that new growth had recently been broken off, leaving the little one here. Well, the little one here is now the big one here. And the good news is, as is often the case, I'm pretty sure that that was the previous growth, or one of them, damage the new growth and it will respond. And I'm pretty sure that eye wasn't there last time I looked. So it looks like it's going to replace that growth with that one. Now obviously both of those new growths were coming together. If somebody hadn't broken that, there'd be two new growths this size and probably two lots of blooms at the same time, which I now can't do because I've only got one new growth. But I've got another one probably coming on behind, so that'll be a bonus. Okay, that'll do for today's watering session. I've watered every single plant in the place, all the mounts, holy pots, ordinary pots, pots under the benches, absolutely everything. And I'm quite tired. So I'll end this one now, and I'll see you again next time.